Greetings everyone, I'm Adam Haritan. Welcome to the woods of western Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful winter morning, and I came here today because exactly 1 week ago, I found some really cool trees in this forest. Now, up until a week ago, I'd never been here before, but I came here because I heard that there were some old growth trees about 1.5 miles from this spot. Now, they're not on any main trail, so you have to bushwhack a bit and climb up a steep hill and try to maneuver through these thick walls of rhododendron, but it's worth it because once you get through all that, there's some pretty big trees. And I want to show you at least one of them, and it might be my favorite tree. No surprise, it is the state tree of Pennsylvania. It is eastern hemlock. Now, this forest is huge. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres in size, but that particular patch of old growth trees is less than 10 acres in size, but it's still worth it getting over there. So if you're interested in going on an adventure with me today, stay tuned. Now, before I show you an old growth eastern hemlock, I want to show you this species at different stages of its life cycle to give you some context. Now, just because you find an eastern hemlock that's smaller in size, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a very, very young tree. Because eastern hemlock, Tsuga canadensis, is one of the most shade-tolerant trees in North America. So it does very well in the understory of a dense, dark forest. And it's a slow-growing tree as well. So it can wait it out in the understory for decades and decades and decades, even over 100 years, and wait until there's an opening in the canopy. And when sunlight comes through, either directly on top of the tree or even from the side, this tree will start to grow much more rapidly in height and in width. So this is a smaller eastern hemlock. Let's keep walking, and I'll show you one that's a little bigger than this. Here's an eastern hemlock that's obviously much bigger than the first one I showed you. Now, I don't know exactly how old this tree is, but I would say it's somewhere between 100 and 200 years old. Now, trees of this size, eastern hemlock trees of this size, aren't that uncommon where I live, but they're not super abundant either. Now, besides its size, which obviously tells us that this is an older tree, the bark pattern also tells us that this tree is getting older. As eastern hemlocks age, the bark develops this very characteristic pattern of ridges and furrows. But as the trees get even older than this, the bark does something very interesting. I don't see it on this tree, but let's go see if we can find it on the old growth trees. Okay, so I'm a little out of breath because this area is pretty difficult to explore. There's no main trail, so you gotta bushwhack a lot. There are a lot of thick walls of rhododendron. You gotta get on your knees. The soil is very thin, and this hillside is very steep, and it all leads down into the river below. So I probably wouldn't take many groups into this area, but I'm happy to bring it to you today. And I finally found the tree that I was hoping I would see again, and it's that one right there. So let's go take a closer look. Okay, so out of all the hemlock trees that I've shown you today, this is obviously the biggest one. This is the oldest one as well. I don't know exactly how old this one is, but I would say it's over 300 years old. Now, hemlocks can live to be over 550 years old. I think that's the oldest tree on record, although there are unverifiable reports of hemlocks growing to be over 980 years old. And as I said before, this is a slow-growing, shade-tolerant tree. So it took a very long time for it to achieve this size. Now, it might look kind of funny from this angle. When you look at the bark pattern, it might look like there's something wrong with this particular tree. And I mentioned before that as trees tend to age, they do something interesting with their bark. They slough it off. So this is the sloughed off bark right here. Over here and on the other side, you can see how the bark retains its ridges and furrows. But as trees go beyond the mature stage into the old growth stage, it's not uncommon to see this balding pattern on the trees. Now, this eastern hemlock tree is alive. And you might be wondering, why are you saying it's alive? Well, first, I wouldn't take you into an area and show you a dead old growth hemlock tree. I would only show you living ones. But I have to mention that it's alive because trees of this size, of this species, are very uncommon. It's not that easy to find a tree of this size of this particular species, at least in western Pennsylvania, for many reasons. First, throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, nearly every tree of this size was cut down. But today, the eastern hemlock is contending with a different kind of threat. It's an insect known as the Hemlock woolly adelgid, which was introduced from Asia into the United States decades ago. It's a sap-sucking insect, and it kills a lot of trees of this size, even smaller trees as well. Now, I see a full crown up there, a nice healthy intact crown. It's nice and green. So I don't think this tree is being attacked, and I don't think it's being treated by any kind of insecticide, because I don't see any mark on this tree that tells me that someone was in here treating it, and this is in a pretty remote area. So hopefully this tree stays alive for quite some time. Now, when I was in this area last week, I found a couple more old growth eastern hemlocks. Some of them were a little smaller than this one. Some might have been bigger, I'm not quite sure because I didn't measure any of them. But I want to show you another one that's of a size comparable to this one. So if you have a few more minutes and you want to continue the adventure, follow me. So here's another eastern hemlock, an old growth eastern hemlock. It's not the only other one in this forest. This particular patch of land has quite a few others, but it's the one that I want to end with today. So you could see the characteristic balding pattern right here, which tells me this is an older growth tree. I would estimate it to be over 300 years old. Now, eastern hemlock is considered to be a foundation species. Not many trees in the eastern United States, especially here in Pennsylvania, are considered to be foundation species, but eastern hemlock is. So what is a foundation species? Well, there are essentially three characteristics that a foundation species possesses. A foundation species is one that creates and defines certain ecosystems. A foundation species influences to an exceptional degree the distribution and abundance of associated plants and animals. And a foundation species modulates core ecosystem processes. And this is evident in eastern hemlock stands, where very little light is able to penetrate through to the forest floor. And this keeps the soils and also the surrounding areas underneath the hemlock trees very cool. An old growth eastern hemlock, like this one right here, is a marvelous sight. It's one of my favorite sights in the entire world. There's nothing quite like being in the presence of a being, a giant being, like this one right here. And I mentioned many times that it was very difficult to get in here, so this is a rather inaccessible place. But sometimes that's where the treasures exist. Sometimes that's where the best things in the world exist, in those inaccessible places that we aren't used to exploring, or we don't want to explore, or we don't think we can explore. But if we can get in there, you'd be surprised what you find. You might not always find what you're looking for. You might not even find old growth trees. You might find smaller trees. But that's okay, because even the smaller trees, the younger trees, are still worthy of our attention and our appreciation. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure today. I appreciate it, and if you enjoyed the video, I encourage you to subscribe to the Learn Your Land YouTube channel and to head on over to learnyourland.com and sign up for the email newsletter so that we can stay in touch. Thank you again for watching. I will see you on the next adventure.